Hello and welcome. We're going to give it a minute or two here for people to come in the room, and then we'll get started today. Welcome. Thanks for being here. We will get started here in just a second as a few more people come into the room here. All right. Okay, I'm going to start with some introductions and a little explanation about how tonight's going to work. And that should give us enough time before we actually get right into the meat of things. So hello, good evening. My name is Gabby Wright. I'm the director of the Communications and Community Engagement Department. If you tried to tune in last week, thank you for coming back again this week. Sorry about the technical difficulties at that point. We're going to have a great conversation tonight. We are utilizing the Q&A function of this webinar. And so that means at the bottom of your screen, you should see a little button that says Q&A. Please feel free to ask questions, write them in there whenever you're ready. Those will come through to us as you're asking them. We also will do a little quiz at the end of one of our presentations here. So just 3 questions, it's quick, just kind of testing your knowledge after our presentation. And we do have live transcripts activated. So if you wanted to read the closed captioning while we're speaking, you can turn that on at the bottom of your screen as well. And finally, the chat is functioning. You can chat with me as the host. So if you have technical difficulties or any other questions specific to how to make something work, you can also ask me that question as well. So I think that's all we need for right now. I'll also help facilitate as we go along. But for now, I'm going to pass it to Malcolm to just say a little welcome for you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate you. If you were here last week, sorry for making it difficult. And thanks again for joining us tonight. If this is your first night, then thanks again for joining us. Home Rule is an opportunity for the voters in Erie to decide if they want to make changes to some of the organizational structure and other aspects of how town government works. And we've got some experts here who have observed how other communities have pursued home rule. Mavis Fitzgerald and Cliff Thompson have been working with the town to help us better understand home rule and how to engage, how they have done engagement in other communities and lessons learned from that. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Mavis and have a bit of a presentation, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. I think that's what we've got for tonight. So thanks again for coming, and we look forward to hearing your questions and I hope we can answer them.
Great, thanks, Cliff. Or Cliff, sorry, Malcolm. Okay, so I'm going to start with an overview video that just kind of gives us a summary, and then I'll go into a little bit of a presentation afterwards. Okay. Oh, sorry about that. And so now I'm just going to jump into a bit more detail about some of the topics that we just saw in the video, and maybe talk a little bit at the end about next steps. And then if you have questions, again, just put stuff in the chat or Q&A, and Gabby will vet those and we'll tackle them at the end. So home rule structures are, the purpose is really to preserve Erie's character and controls like the mapping out of the future. So it's resident driven rules and regulations. Everything is voter approved through the charter and an elected charter commission. And the main benefit for home rule is really to move away from state intervention, and just talk about what is in the best interest of the folks in Erie. And so the process begins June 2022. The town board would adopt an ordinance to hold an election, adopting home rule and creating the charter commission. November 2022, the charter commission nominees complete their petition to be on the ballot. May 2023, if the ballot measure passes, the charter commission will submit a charter. And 2023, the election would include a measure asking voters to approve that charter. A little bit more, 93% of all cities and towns in Colorado are governed by home rule. Erie is the largest that is not. And it's really just, again, based on the principle that the best government is one closest to the people. How is home rule structured? Again, it operates under a charter that's written by the elected charter commission. And it means home rule municipalities have the power to make relative laws and exercise control over local concern, but anything that is related to taxes still goes to a vote, and Tabor still applies. The charter establishes basically a municipal constitution. And the charter commission is an elected body, and that can be from 9 to 21 members, and that your board of trustees will decide how many folks will be on your charter commission. And to create a very successful charter, you really want members of the community from all sorts of viewpoints, and so everyone is represented. Home rule really helps the town with long-term planning and more flexibility in securing funding sources. And again, you can adopt more types of taxes, such as short-term rental, lodging taxes, but again, any changes will still require voter approval. One scenario would be there's an opportunity to preserve some land like just outside of city limits for open space under statutory, which you are now. You only have jurisdiction within your own boundaries. Home rule charter can allow for limited control or annexation for outside lands outside of town borders. Another scenario, if Erie continues to grow and becomes a travel destination, hotels and short-term rentals are more common. How can you start taxing on that? Under statutory towns, you can only collect property tax and sales tax from hotels that are built within the jurisdiction of the town. Under home rule, you can allow for an additional taxation like lodging tax. Some disadvantages of home rule is and this is probably the greatest disadvantage, if a charter is poorly written, and that means it's very restrictive, and so it doesn't allow the flexibility that home rule allows. Some people would say that limits on the municipality that are written in the charter could be a disadvantage, a one-time cost, but actually the town this will coincide with the county election, so that will ease some of the costs. Some people just don't like change to status quo, just the structure of how the municipality is set up right now under the state. And then there could be potentially more governmental powers if there's a very restrictive charter written. Advantages are just easier solutions to local problems, solutions that fit local needs, freedom from state interference, authority to legislate on local matters, and just it really enhances resident control and folks really driving the future of your community. And I just wanted to mention that on the Engage Erie website, we have all of these resources. So there's a roadmap that talks about the timeline of how you get to home rule. It's full of Q&A. You can see the video. This presentation that I'm showing tonight, as well as a much more detailed one that gives more examples and scenarios. And then there's also just a basic handout that kind of goes over all of this, like what's a charter, what's the process. And that is it for me.
Thanks, Mavis.
Yeah.
We definitely wanted to be quick with the presentation to get to questions. We knew that we have been kind of pushing this topic for a while, so hopefully you've had a chance to hear about it and see some of the resources out there. But this is the opportunity to go back and really dig deep into any specific questions you have. So while you're thinking about your questions and writing them in the Q&A, I'm going to just start a quick quiz for you. If you're on a mobile device, it might be a little funky, but if you're on your desktop, it should just pop up right in your screen. Please just answer quickly. There's 3 questions in there, and then when I see the answers, we'll figure out what we need to focus on a little bit more as well. So I'm going to start that right now. Okay, so that should pop up right on your screens for you. And I don't think our panelists are allowed to participate. So you can see the questions, but I don't think you're allowed to vote. All right, fabulous. And while you're doing that, I did get a couple of questions in our Q&A and one in the chat. So I'm gonna read those out loud to our panelists, and we will do our best to answer those tonight for you. Just give you another minute to vote here. Right. Okay. That is a good amount who have voted, and you certainly don't have to if you don't want to. But what I'm seeing so far is that we have mostly correct answers, which is great. So I will go through those now one by one. I'll end our quiz. It looks like everybody who wanted to vote has. I'm not seeing any more trickle in here. So we'll end. And let's see, question number 1, who writes the new governing document? Who writes that charter? And it's a commission of people elected by Erie voters. So that's the important part, that it is just residents voted in by other residents. And so that is what really helps it become a governing document by the people. Number 2, when would a new charter go into effect? Correct, after Erie voters have approved it. And so the earliest would be November 2023. And then true or false, the town of Erie is the largest by population municipality that is still statutory. And that is true. Okay, perfect. I'll just share those with you all if you wanted to see. And then we'll get started with some Q&A. So I'm going to jump in here and we'll start with a question from Jim. He says, this is not the town of Erie's first attempt to move to home rule. So what would we say attributed to any past failures to move to home rule, and what are some best practices to make sure this attempt is successful? Anyone on our panel want to jump in for that one?
Sure, I will. I'm not completely educated on the first attempt to go home rule, but it was a very specific and very restrictive charter. And so that is what we want to avoid this time. And that's being very, not selective at all, but like really trying to get lots of members from different segments of the community to serve as commission members. And that would be one of the best practices to mitigate this. And the second is to really, because so many communities, way over 50% of the state, our home rule is looking at similar communities and their charters and using that as a foundation and a jumping off point to write a more inclusive and successful charter that both the Board of Trustees will look at and say, yes, let's put this on the ballot. Anyone else want to add?
Maybe Malcolm, you look like maybe. I can't help, sorry.
Bottom left.
Somehow my cursor was going around the 3 screens and I couldn't get it. I had heard a myth that it was somehow related to a requirement in the charter that everyone have a firearm, and I didn't find any evidence that was true. So I think that's a urban myth. So, but it did go down resoundingly. I was able to pull up the vote, whatever it was almost twice as many people voted against it as voted for it. So something about it did not resonate with Erie voters. And that was back in 1999.
Perfect. Yeah, I think to Mavis's point, that's the reason to have a very well-rounded charter commission to help write a charter that resonates with more people. All right, thank you for that question. I'm going to skip, let's see, over into the chat for a second. And I had a question here that says, are there any examples of issues, plans, or goals in the recent past that were difficult or impossible to resolve because we were not home rule?
I would say no. And that's a good segue for me. I've worked in both a home rule municipality, the city of Louisville. I was city manager there for 10 years. And now having worked in Erie for 3.5 years, I would say the day-to-day differences are really small in terms of how we do things. The biggest difference in my mind is how the voters want the governing body to be composed and elected. Whether that is by district. Currently, as I think you all know, trustees are voted at large, as is the mayor. And in a home rule municipality, you could have them elected by district. That would be a significant change. The other significant change is in terms of tax collection and doing that directly through the municipality as opposed to having the state collect the taxes. Again, that typically results in more collection of taxes, not because of a higher tax rate, but because localities typically do a better job of making sure that everyone's paying their taxes. And I would say that creates a level playing field for businesses that operate within the town so that everybody's playing by the same rules and everyone's paying their taxes. Other than those two things, there are differences, as pointed out, land use issues. I know some home rule municipalities have used their ability to acquire land for open space purposes outside of their jurisdictional boundaries, and only home rule municipalities have that ability. Other than that, the home rule charter can create more emphasis on different things, whether that's writing into the charter protections for open space, or writing into the charter more stringent ethics requirements, or writing into the charter specific boards and commissions so that those can't be abolished without a vote of the people to change the charter. Different provisions like that set the tone based on what the local residents want to see. And so the Charter Commission is critically important in making sure that they come up with a charter that's reflective of what the local voters want to see.
Thanks for that, Malcolm. And I think you did just answer the third part of Brian's question. So that's perfect. Brian, thanks for writing your questions in here. We also read them on the website today, which is another place where you all can always ask questions, and we'll be answering them there as well. So he has three parts to the question. The first one is about the cost. What does it cost in this effort to go home rule? We are compiling the costs right now. So for consulting services that you see here, we have not paid for any official advertising for things like on Facebook or the newspaper and those. And then we're looking at staff time. So question number one will be answered soon. Question number two, it maybe Mavis, if you wanted to talk about this one a bit. I know you've been pulling together some answers, but it says, although the structure of the charter is yet to be determined, the Charter Commission will write that. It seems that home rule might add to the size of Erie's government. So what have similar efforts in other municipalities resulted in terms of additional staff?
They haven't resulted in additional staff at all, but some just, I would say, changes to the way things move within staff, and also changes to how, like Malcolm was talking about, how elections are run, term limits, things like that have changed. But resulted in, so the projects that I have worked on and 3 other communities have not resulted in additional paid staff. And it really is just Gabby and Amy and Heidi's time right now as we start the process. So it just isn't necessarily more money for your town staff, but more of their time while you're going through the process. And a little bit of an answer to one is an election usually costs between $10,000 and $12,000. And again, because this is going to coincide with Weld or Boulder County, that will either be completely zeroed out or at least halved.
Thanks for that, Mavis. All right, let me go back over to our chat. I think we got a question over there. Do we know the largest population of a town that's currently under home rule?
Denver is the largest city in Colorado. So yes.
Denver is a city and county, so they're a little bit different.
Yeah, so I think the city of Denver.
And I think I would.
It would be Aurora and Colorado Springs.
Yeah, which both are as well.
And then the second part of that question from Jen was, if we go home rule, is that it? Is there any going back, or is home rule the final answer for the town?
That I will have to look at, but there has not been a history actually in all of the United States that a town has gone home rule and then gone back to statutory. So that I'm sure of, but I do not know if it's a possibility. We can find out.
Thanks. We can, again, we'll be posting the recording of this on the website that I shared with you, erieco.us/home rule charter. And we'll answer some of these questions there as well. Okay, next question from Anne. She wants to know what prompted us to start talking about home rule. Why did we start this conversation?
Well, I'll take that one. I think it's been expressed as an interest among some of the trustees, at least since I started working in Erie 3.5 years ago. Even before I started, people were saying they wanted to pursue home rule because of its ability to, I like to characterize it, instead of doing everything that is required by state law, it lets you do whatever the town wants to do as long as it's not prohibited by state law. So it kind of turns, it allows more flexibility to deal with unanticipated events. State legislation takes a little bit longer sometimes to catch up to technological changes or societal changes. And as long as Erie voters want something to happen more quickly, if they were under a home rule charter, they could make changes a little faster. And again, you can't do things that are prohibited by state law, but if it's not prohibited by state law and it's a matter of local concern, then you have the flexibility locally to deal with that.
Thanks, Malcolm. Okay, so we touched on this question already, but well, this is from Joe. Home rule will require additional town staff for tax collection. How will this be paid for? And to be clear, it might require additional town staff for tax collection. That's not necessarily a given.
Yeah, I would actually say that it probably would require additional staff. That's maybe different than what Mavis said. In my experience, again, just one home rule municipality here in Colorado is Louisville. I think they had, initially they had one tax auditing position and eventually added a second one. And the basis for adding a second one was the cost of the position was offset by a factor of 2 or 3 by the amount of additional tax revenue that they were able to collect that was not being collected. Again, it's not imposing new taxes, it's just making sure that everybody is paying the taxes that are legally owed. And the auditing positions could result in that leveling of the playing field in a way that more than offset the cost of adding the positions and providing staff and computers for them. And it also, I think, ensured that the town was in control of the tax auditing process so that they could provide more education about what taxes were owed. They could field questions when there were issues that came up. And it provided a more direct relationship between the town staff and the business community who were paying the taxes. And we, at least in Louisville, perceived that as a positive thing to be able to be more closely connected with the business community.
Thank you.
Yes, Malcolm, you're correct. Sorry, I kind of forgot about the whole and that is another reason that a lot of communities want to move that way, because you have the ability to operate as a self-governing tax authority, and that does mean adopting and administrating your own sales tax, tax code, and enforcing compliance, and then doing your own audit, which also means that you have more control into where the money goes. And you're getting it faster.
However, you do not have to collect taxes locally. You can still rely on the state to do that. So that's an optional thing, and that would again be something that would be subject to the Board of Trustees or ultimately the City Council to determine whether or not a position should be added.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to a question now from one of our trustees-elect, Emily Bear. She says, what would happen to our new Chapter 12 regulations that are with regard to oil and gas regulation in the town? Would that be rewritten into a new charter?
I should probably have an attorney answer that one, but I'll take a stab at it. I don't think it would change the code of ordinances for the town. Unless the voters wanted to emphasize something or restrict something from being included in the code of ordinances. But essentially the charter could be written in such a way that it simply adopts the current code in whole, and going forward it could be amended by the City Council. But it would not necessarily change any of the ordinances unless that was specifically called out in the charter itself.
Right. a lot of these questions are going to be, it depends on the charter commission and how they write the charter, I think.
Right.
Okay, so there's a great question from Marlene that I think is a one for Mavis and myself. How will you get the community involved and interested in learning about all of this? Interested in reading and understanding the charter once it's written and drafted, and then voting on it? That's a wonderful question. We're right in the middle of engagement right now to talk about the process as a whole, and assuming it goes to the ballot, and assuming that it gets voted in and a charter commission created, that does begin a new process of engagement then. And so the charter commission will have some resources at their fingertips to help them write the charter. And then the town can help do this sort of engagement again next year to help the public understand what the draft charter says, how they can be involved and ask questions, how they would vote on, how they would be a part of the election to vote on it, and those sorts of things. Mavis, did you have any specific thoughts on what's worked really well for your other communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually just making sure that you activate all those different communities, and hopefully you're getting charter commission members from a lot of different walks of life, and not everyone that has exactly the same idea. So they have very different social circles, and it's activating their friends, their coworkers, and that sort of thing. So it really is making sure from the beginning that you get folks excited that really want to be part of it, and then want to bring their community, each of their own communities in.
Thanks for that. Okay, we have another question from Jim. Who would be determining the boundaries of districts if at-large voting was to be changed in a new charter?
The city council would do that, and they would draft, well, or that could be written into the charter itself, again, specifying the boundaries, but typically it's kind of like the legislative boundaries. Every 10 years after the census, you need to adjust the boundaries to make sure they have a roughly equivalent population within each district, so that the number of council seats appointed or elected in each district is representing a roughly similar number of voters. So that's something that I think the initial charter, here again, we need an attorney here to answer these questions, but I think the initial charter would call out generally what the districts would be, and then based on census data, those boundaries could be adjusted to make sure that it continues to reflect an equal number of voters in each district.
Anyone else want to weigh in? Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, I have a question from Terry, and ask, are revenue streams like taxes, education, funding, infrastructure that Erie currently receives from the state or Weld and Boulder counties affected by the adoption of home rule?
No, and federal funding is not affected either.
Straightforward. I like it. Okay, so let's see. We have a question here. Has OSTAB, the Open Space and Trails Advisory Board, identified any wish list properties for open space purchase that are currently outside of the town boundaries that we currently could not attain?
I don't believe so. And so far, we've always tried to acquire properties through willing sellers. So that's the strategy so far. I haven't done any condemnations. And let me get back. I'll see if I can pull up the OSTAB list and see if any of them are outside of the town's jurisdiction. So I'll get back to you on that one.
Thanks, Malcolm. I think the next question is a reiteration of a previous question, asking, do we have a specific problem right now that we are trying to solve by going home rule? Some of our conversation so far tonight has alluded to the fact that maybe there is not something very specific at the moment we are trying to solve. But what is a problem that only home rule could solve for us?
I will say there's not a specific problem we're trying to solve right now that home rule would enable us to pursue. So it's more providing that additional flexibility.
Yeah, and I would just say that it's beneficial to create this governmental structure to ensure that the town grows in the right way. And secondly, just allowing for more efficiency, more revenue generating options, more control over future land use. And so all of this is just long-term benefits.
I think what, in my time researching this, since I've been with the town, what I personally like about the idea of home rule from a resident perspective would be creating a charter, a governance document by the people, for the people who live in that community. I do think that each of our communities are very unique and have different needs and wants from the people who live here. So it seems to me that that would be a benefit to writing a charter that fits Erie as the community we are and the community that we're trying to become as we grow and change. So if we don't have a problem right now, it could set us up for success in the future for things we maybe can foresee. All right. The only other question I have in my queue we have talked about, it is just more about what kind of support would staff need if we do move to home rule. And I think we've covered that unless anybody else needed to say something else. Okay. All right. Do we have other comments from our panelists or anything else you wanted to say? We're scheduled till 7:30, so we do have some more time for more questions if they come up.
I will, as a follow-up to the question earlier about open space properties, the OSTEB priority list does have some properties outside the town's boundaries. So if we've only pursued things based on willing sellers and have not pursued anything on a condemnation basis. So, but if the town really wanted to pursue something, that home rule ability would provide the ability to condemn property outside of the town's boundaries for a public purpose.
Thanks, Malcolm. I will, while we're waiting to see if more questions come through, I will just give another little rundown about our next steps that we're going through here. We are right in the middle of public engagement, so no decisions have been made about anything yet. We're just having these conversations with you all, giving you a chance to ask your questions of us so you can understand the issue really well. We're going to present everything that we learned from this public engagement to the Board of Trustees in the beginning of June, and then they can make a final decision whether or not it will go on the ballot. Then in November, you will have a chance to vote and decide, yes, you want a commission to create a charter, or no, you do not. And if you say yes, you will also have the opportunity at the same time to vote in those charter commission members. So that would all happen this November. And then they would write a charter over the next 6 months or so that would be sent out for everybody to read as a draft by May. And then again, it will be added to the ballot for the November election to be voted on again by the whole community. So we've got some different milestones that we're reaching for right now. We still have quite a ways to go before any of this would be final. If you are interested in being a Charter Commission member or know people that are very active in the community and you think are thoughtful and have some great ideas to bring to the table, they would be great Charter Commission members, and they can reach out and let us know so we can send information to them. And Amy, you have your hand up. What would you like to share?
I just want to say there is another question in the chat.
Oh, fabulous. Thank you. I have another question from Jim. It says, would home rule give us greater flexibility in open space purchases or annexations when competing along our borders, for example, with Broomfield or Frederick?
Yes, yes, it would. If two different jurisdictions are pursuing, and I don't know about annexations, the laws around annexations are quite restrictive, regardless of home rule status. I think you still have to have a majority of property owners representing at least 50% of the land area to be annexed, and then there are adjacency requirements. So that it's pretty detailed regarding annexations. And I think that the ability to annex much beyond your immediately adjacent property is very limited. On the other hand, being able to acquire open space properties outside of the jurisdiction within some limited distance doesn't necessarily mean you have to annex that property into the jurisdiction. There have been other communities and counties that have annexed or purchased open space outside their boundaries, both on a friendly basis, a willing seller basis, and acquiring it through condemnation.
Thanks, Malcolm. And sorry about that, Jen. I had my Q&A box up open over the chat, and I see you asked a question in the actual chat box. So the question here was, we seem to have a hard time keeping businesses here in Erie or attracting businesses. I've heard it's due to the cost of doing business in the town. Could going home rule help?
Well, first, I would question the assertion that we have a hard time recruiting and attracting and keeping businesses. I think the Economic Development Department has done a good job of bringing new businesses into town, both in downtown Erie and in other areas. The problem is not so much getting them, but having places for them to go. That's the biggest problem right now, is available spaces for new business to come. With the town center and with 9 Mile on the west side, and expansion of areas to the south of the more developed portion of downtown, I think it'll be easier to recruit more businesses to come to town because we have more spaces where they can relatively quickly expand. Other than, and I don't see any particular advantages to home rule versus statutory town. Both can provide various kinds of incentives to businesses to expand. For instance, the incentives that the town has offered to businesses downtown for capital improvements. We've done several $50,000 grant programs. We've also done tax increment financing that provides funding for business expansions where there is an urban renewal area. And within the town of Erie, we have 5 different urban renewal areas, including downtown, the 9 Mile site out at the airport, the town center area to the south and west of downtown, and the Collier's Hill area as well. So it is possible to do economic development incentives as a statutory town.
Great. Okay. I think I've read all the questions that are there right now. So we have a few more minutes. We can hang out and wait for a couple more questions. I did just drop in the chat the link to the webpage again. We will be posting this recording there. There are already a lot of questions and answers posted there, and you can always ask more questions there when you're ready. Let's see, here's a question. Are there scenarios in which home rule would impact developers at town center or any of the other places you just mentioned?
Yeah, there certainly could be. It just, again, depends on how you write the charter and if there were a specific roadmap for development that was either financially restrictive or I think something that we're seeing a lot more is green building, net or net zero to or net positive building requirements, stuff like that. So I don't know about like definitely restricting how developers come into your community and what's developed could be planned out. Does that cover it?
I think so.
Yeah, I think that's good response on that one. I have seen charters that imposed more restrictive conditions. Typically, the ones I recall are including how open space properties should be managed and categorizing the open space into different groups and kind of getting down to the level of managing that property. And it's conceivable that a charter could include provisions like that, restricting or providing conditions under which certain types of development could be permitted or not.
Great question in our chat from Jen. Are charters from other towns public? Can the public review them? Yes, it depends on the town or city's website, how easy it is to get to. But you certainly can do a search for all of them and typically find it pretty quickly. Mavis, maybe you have another way to get to them even faster.
No, pretty much the same. Just going to picking a like community and going to their website, and yes, it is posted. Sometimes it's harder to find than others.
So for example, when you asked that question, I just typed into Google City of Boulder Charter. Theirs is integrated directly into MuniCode, which is also what we use at the town of Erie to show our codes here as well. And so you can read the full charter right there within that software service. And I have a feeling that a lot of cities and towns are similar, that it's built right into their code.
Yes, and usually it's just a separate tab or something, but you are correct.
Can we recommend any charters that differ in significant ways that we could compare and contrast? Do you have any of those, Mavis or Cliff, that you know of?
No, I will, Jim, we can, I will track some down. And I'm assuming he wants one that's maybe very specific and one that's more broad. And that's probably, Jim, is going to be different community sizes. So like-sized communities are generally going to be a little bit broader. Very large populations are going to be a little bit more specifically on development and tax districts and stuff like that. But yes, I'll find a couple that are different.
Thanks. And when we get any of this information, we've promised you, it will all get posted to that same webpage that I've shared with you a couple times today. Great. A few more minutes here. Anybody else has other questions? Just so you know, one of the other things we're doing is some in-person conversations. If you'd like to come chat with us, we're going to do some tabling events at the Arbor Day Earth Day event that's on April 30th. We're also going to be at the town fair. We're certainly at town hall if you want to stop in and chat with us as well. We are also doing some conversations directly with our advisory boards and commissions. They are already very active and civically engaged people on those boards and commissions. So we're talking to them a lot about what it might mean to also be on a charter commission, or if they know people who would be interested. So we're having a lot of conversations right now that you can get involved in. And that might be it for our questions for this evening. Malcolm, I don't know if you wanted to wrap up and say anything else.
I was trying to look on the Colorado Municipal League website to see if they had any specific listings of charters. Looks like they've got some document, but you have to purchase it. So
Of course. We did.
Fast.
I have just a couple other quick questions come in. Emily asked how people can sign up to be on the commission. That is going to be a full official process to be on the ballot. So there will be specific deadlines to become a candidate. And so we're collecting interest right now. If you wanted to email communications@erieco.gov, so it's communications with an S on the end, and just let us know you're interested. We'll put you on a list to make sure we send out more information as we get a little closer to that time. It will be a full process to become a candidate. And then one other question here, if we are at 30,000 population roughly right now, and our build out is expected to be about 65,000, would it be expected to have amendments to the charter in the future?
I would expect there would be amendments. And I'm drawing on my experience in Louisville. There were some, what I would characterize as minor technical administrative amendments that dealt with administrative processes. I think there was a restriction in the charter that prevented certain kinds of contracts for copying machines or something like that. Now, it's been a long time, but we asked the voters to amend the charter to delete that provision, and the voters approved that charter amendment. So small things like that that maybe seem like they're really important now as part of a charter, or things that somebody really wants and everybody else consents to, but it becomes a hindrance over time. If the city can make a compelling case that something like that should be amended out of the charter, then those kinds of things could be anticipated in the future. So there is flexibility to change the charter over time if there are provisions that are perceived as problematic. But again, you have to make the case to the voters that it's really important enough to change the charter. And that's part of the aspect of local control. I would like to circle back a little bit, Mavis. I think you cited some election costs that were in the $5,000 to $10,000 range. I'm thinking our costs in Erie are, for a coordinated election at Boulder County, are more than that, but maybe Heidi, you can jump in on that. Heidi, our town clerk, is knowledgeable about all those election issues and more knowledgeable than I am on election costs. So maybe you can field that one, Heidi.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's more in the range of 40, 50,000 and probably double that if we do it on our own.
And I think that probably just reflects the number of voters and ballots and all of that coordination with the county that's required. But I guess unless there are any more questions, I would just summarize my take on home rule is, again, it allows you the flexibility to address things that maybe have not been contemplated by state law that say statutory towns must operate this way, and it allows you to do basically anything that's not prohibited by state law, and the state law and case law clearly defines what are matters of statewide significance and what are matters of local concern. And charters and home rule municipalities can really only function in those areas that are defined as matters of local concern or have not yet been defined. And that's, as technology changes and as there are societal changes, those can be areas that a charter allows you to address based on the will of the voters in the municipality. So I think that's the rationale for pursuing this.
Thanks, Malcolm. And thanks so much to all of our panelists for being here tonight. I think we got some really great questions. Really appreciate everybody coming here and being so engaged. And we'll be posting all questions and answers to that webpage for you all. That's it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Good night.
Good night.